Members, officers, people, welcome to this meeting of the Hampshire and Isle of Wight Fire and Rescue Authority, being held here at our shared headquarters at Eastleigh. This meeting is being recorded for broadcast on the authority's website and will be available for repeated viewing. The press and members of the public are also permitted to film and broadcast this meeting. Those remaining at the meeting are consenting to be filmed and recorded, and to the possible use of those images and recordings for broadcasting purposes. There is no scheduled fire alarm today. In the event of alarm going off, out of that door, turn left, follow someone in uniform, I would suggest. You all know how the microphones work. Please turn them off when you finish, because otherwise it dilutes the power of the next person. So, agenda item number 1, apologies for absence. Katie, please.
We have apologies from Councillor David Harrison and also the Chief Fire Officer, Neil Odin, as well.
Yes, we'll talk about the Chief Fire Officer in a minute. Sacking offence not to be here. Item 2, declarations of interest. Anybody? No? No? Good. Item 3, minutes of the previous meeting. Are you all happy with the minutes of the previous meeting on pages 5 and 10 of your information pack? Okay, well, I will sign them. Item 4, deputations. There aren't any, to my knowledge. Item 5, chairman announcements. There are a few, as you would expect. You will recall in the papers that firefighter Barry Martin, who was a Scottish firefighter, was killed in Edinburgh, and firefighters across the country observed a minute's silence on Monday, the 13th of February, following his death. He sadly died following injuries sustained at a building in Edinburgh in January. You might have seen last week he had rather an impressive funeral going down the Royal Mile in Edinburgh. On behalf of the authority, we send our condolences, and our thoughts are with his family's friends and colleagues. A bit about the Turkey earthquake. 9 of our search and rescue firefighters were deployed to Turkey as part of the UK International Search and Rescue Team, providing specialist help following that devastating earthquake. The team were part of a 77-strong group made up from firefighters and staff from 14 different fire and rescue services from across the country. Members of our team set up the base of operations and took part in life-saving activities in and around Hatay, including a 25-hour rescue operation to free a man and a woman from underneath the rubble. Impressive stuff. I think we will make sure that it goes out on social media, please. Lots of pictures and lots of things, because it hasn't been terribly well covered in the national press. So we need to sort that. Yes, sir.
Can I just say that I think the work which they've done is exemplary, and it just goes to show the necessity for the training which we give for urban search and rescue, and particularly with Fort Widley and the training which takes place up there. And all the other work which they do in training, but it's so important that they are trained properly to deal with these sorts of examples. Because when you see the pictures on television of the piles of rubble, and you think, how are they going to get anybody out of there? And you see those great big slabs of concrete there laying on top, and you just wonder. But it's marvellous what they do. And having been to a number of demonstrations or training exercises that they've had, particularly at Fort Widley and further along on the top of the hill when they knocked down a big building up there, it was very interesting to see how they can manoeuvre in and find the ways of getting to save people. So all thanks to them.
Good point, Roger. Thank you. Thank you for that. Moving on, the firefighters' graduation ceremony, which took place on the 12th of January, saw the completion of firefighter training course T222, and the ceremony was held here, where the graduates were presented with their certificates by the Chief Fire Officer. There were in total 19 trainees, of which 6 were female. This was the first time that Hampshire and the Isle of Wight whole-time trainees have been trained on both the mainland and the island, with 6 of the squad completing most of their training as a residential course at the Ryde Training Centre. The next course, T123, started on the 13th of February and will see a total of 11 individuals joining the service. Both recent training courses have each welcomed 3 trainees from the Jersey Fire and Rescue Service as part of our work with 3S Fire Community Interest Company, and they will now return to Jersey as fully skilled firefighters. I do urge you, members, if you can, to come to that next graduation process. Yeah, with those of you who have been, it is a rollicking good day. I mean, it's full of everything, emotion, pride, and really the feelings you can feel from the families about just how proud they are of their firefighters is excellent. So do come, and I know some of you were at the last one, and you will be saying something about it. I attended with Cal the other day. When was it, Cal? Last week? 2 weeks ago? The groundbreaking ceremony at Cosham. I allowed the people doing it to have their spade back, apart from last time. But again, I mean, it's going to be a very good, modern, all singing, all dancing fire station. It shows you what we are doing with your fire service. HMIC reports. In January, the service received its first full inspection report since becoming a combined fire authority with the Isle of Wight. His Majesty's Inspection of Constabulary and Fire and Rescue Services rated the service as good for how effective it is at keeping people safe and secure. The service rated requires improvement in the efficiency and people categories, with the people-related causes for concern closed. The report includes many positive findings where the fire service has been graded as requires improvement. The service has been recognised for the work that is already underway in many of these areas to make improvements. Various improvement activity in the service's Year 4 safety and directorate plans will be undertaken in response to HMI's report. A paper will be presented to the March Standards and Governance Committee with more details, which will include the next steps that the service is taken. A full report can be found on the HIWFRS website, and after this meeting this afternoon there will be an awareness session for members that will take place here after lunch, just so that members are fully aware about what we think of the report and the further actions to be taken. Latest on the Industrial Action Update. As you may have seen, on the 9th of February, the National Joint Council made a new pay offer to our Grey Book employees. The proposal covers a 2-year period backdated to July 2022, a 7% increase on all basic pay rates, followed by a further 5% increase from the 1st of July this year. A pay award for our Green Book colleagues was agreed last year. As well as a pay award, there is also agreement to further explore other issues entirely separate from the pay offer over the coming months, including pay for on-call and control staff, pay progression more generally, continuing professional development payments, and expanding the role. The Fire Brigade Union's Executive Council has considered the offer and are recommending that their members accept it. The ballot of FBU members has now begun and is closing on the 6th of March. The government is unlikely to provide any additional funding to support services to pay this revised offer. We will discuss the impact on our budget shortly, which is in item 8 of your paperwork. Considerable work has been carried out to prepare the service for industrial action. I'm hopeful that we won't need this work, but our plans have been tested. We will update members once the results of the FBU ballot are known. Now, just a word on our Chief Fire Officer. Neil is not here, as I've already mentioned, for very good reasons. He is at Windsor Castle, where he is going to be presented with his Queen's Fire Service medal. By whom, we don't know yet, but he will tell us. This is the highest award of its kind for a serving officer in the fire service that they can receive, and it's a well-deserved honour. On behalf of the authority, we all send our congratulations to him on this monumental day. Now, my vice chairman, your vice chairman, our very own Councillor Hughes, this is his last authority meeting, and he officially departs from the fire authority at the county council meeting on Thursday, with much sadness. Gary, I would like to thank you, as all the members would, for your outstanding and service with considerable alacrity that you have given since you've been vice chairman. The point of this authority is that we are a scrutiny committee, and you have been brilliant, ripping people apart and and searching for the unsearchable. That's very good. So I would like to thank you very much.
Chairman, thank you very much. I once heard a phrase of somebody being referred to as a seagull, where they come in, they make a lot of noise, leave a load of crap and disappear. I genuinely and sincerely hope you don't consider me a seagull. However, I'd like to thank you for your tolerance, your patience, your kindness, and please be rest assured that wherever I am, I will always hold the Fire and Rescue Service Hampshire and Isle of Wight in a good light, and I will always be an advocate for you, because I genuinely believe that my time spent here with you has been educational, particularly when I go to graduation ceremonies and I see the calibre of the people that come through the door, and particularly their backgrounds. And then we talk about member development now. I've been to 2 graduation ceremonies, and to hear just the breadth of experience that the people come, their age, their desire to be here. And I must confess, I was not surprised when the firefighter from Eastleigh Airport won the awards at the last graduation ceremony, because if she hadn't, there'd have been something clearly wrong. But I genuinely enjoy those occasions, because you realise that actually, yes, you're here to protect the people, but ultimately you do represent the people as best as you can, and that's very impressive. So I do wish you well. I do have lots of notes for the rest of the meeting, and I will continue to be a diligent participant up until I leave the building this afternoon. So thank you very much.
Gary, thank you. As to Gary's replacement as vice chairman, as I say, Gary officially leaves the authority on Thursday, so I'm all for having continuation, and it is my desire to ask Zoe to become the new vice chairman of this authority. So that's what I would propose. Does anyone else have any proposal for anyone else to fill that office? So if we can have a vote, please, for Zoe to be the new vice chairman, seconded by Derek? Yeah. Okay, that's unanimous. Is that all right, Paul? Are we legal? We are. Thank you. Don't move. So you become that personage on Thursday. Pleasure. Item 6 then, members' developments. Anybody? Karen.
This goes back to, I unfortunately didn't come to the last meeting, so it goes back to before that, but I think it's worth saying that I went to the fire cadets at Sandown when they first started, so I was just really impressed with everything, and I'm really looking forward to their passing out in June. But all the volunteers, all the children that get involved in that, they just loved it. It was great to watch, and I'm really looking forward to the passing out.
Good, thank you. And the Lord Lieutenant of the Isle of Wight does a sterling job, doesn't she? Turns up to all of them. Good.
She's the
Tony.
new patron, isn't she, of the Isle of Wight part? Yeah.
Tony?
Thank you, Chair. With my People Champion hat on, I met with Reverend Dom Jones, who's the police chaplain, to look at their services. And subsequently, we met with our Director of People and Organisational Development to talk about that and other matters. With my Fire Authority hat on, I've attended the recent graduation. I've also met with the Assistant Chief Fire Officer to talk about resilience planning. As the Southampton rep, I've met with the Area Commander, Dave Clements, for Southampton to discuss issues more locally. And last week I met with the Chief Fire Officer. Thank you.
Good, thank you. Cal?
Thank you, Chairman. As mentioned, glad to attend the groundbreaking ceremony at the site of the new Cosham Station. I think that's a really good example, and hopefully will be a good example going forward, of collaboration across the public sector. Clearly, Portsmouth City Council were involved in that deal, as was the Police and Crime Commissioner's Office, amongst others. I think the new fire station is hopefully just going to be the first part of that general regeneration of that area, which will also include the residential development and other sites for public services. So very glad to attend and look forward to see that building spring up over the coming months. Have also, as usual, been engaging quite closely with the Fire Brigades Union on a number of issues, particularly of late around pay, as has been discussed, including attending a lobby of Parliament with some local FBU members employed by the service. I was glad to see the revised offer that's been brought forward. As you say, 12% over 2 years, a significant increase on the initial offer. I know there's been some speculation from local politicians, not people in this room, but of late about whether strikes work. I think for me, this is an example where industrial action, obviously it didn't quite get to a strike, hopefully it won't get that far, but it has improved the offer that's been made available to those staff. So, as you say, the FBU Executive Council are now recommending that the offer be accepted. It'd be interesting to see how that plays out amongst the membership, but hopefully the strike can be avoided, and what I think is a fair and a decent pay rise for frontline firefighters can be delivered. Thank you.
Thank you. And, Zoe?
Yeah, thank you. Just to echo Gary's sentiments of the Passing Out Parade, I think it's always amazing and to understand people's backgrounds and motivations of why they join the service. And it's very inspirational to hear the diversity of their backgrounds that they came from. Aside from that, I met with my hat on as champion for children and young people. I met with Karen Farr and Judy Rice recently to talk about the impact of the prevention and keeping our children safe in schools. So what I wanted to do after a visit in September, when I went to see the activity that they do at Key Stage 1 to 3 at schools, is understand how they come to target those schools and the impact that it makes. So they target schools of Key Stage 1 to 3 from a preventional and keeping children safe aspect. They work with the schools, they work with Hampshire, they work with police, and they work with ONS data to target specific schools of deprivation, high crime, to make sure that they're impactful. What was really pleasing to hear is that also spans to private schools and home-educated children. So what we did explore is making sure that that preventional measure is spread across all the school system. We then talked about FireWise, which was previously known as their fire setting programme, and how they look at targeting one-to-one interventions in school. They work with about 70 to 90 interventions a year, so looking at some of those statistics. And what was really pleasing to hear is only about 2% of that re-offend with the work that they do with them. It spans from so they use a risk assessment framework to look at the low-level interventions to those that maybe have gone more serious with the fire setting. But they also look at long-term psychological triggers, so things like trauma and the impact of that, the reaction to situations of why they maybe look at fire setting, but also the inquisitive mind and how that maybe can impact regarding those incidences. So it was really good to explore the impact and the statistics and the pleasing results of those. They also do follow-ups within a 3 to 6 month period. There is 2 new Prince's Trust programmes due to start. What I'm hoping to do is actually spend a whole session with a Prince's Trust programme. I've done many parades and passing out parades, but actually I want to go and see a physical session. So hopefully when we meet next time, I will see that. We opened Basingstoke Cadets, and then lastly, what I'm really pleased to hear is that most of these programmes are supported by our volunteers, and the Fire Authority actually has achieved the kite mark from NVCO. Stu, hopefully that is right. Investing in their volunteers. So this kite mark looks at support programmes that we can offer and training that we can offer for volunteers within the service that support our programmes, such as the cadet programmes. So thank you.
Thank you, Zoe. There is a volunteers evening session coming up here. I don't have the date immediately, but I do hope, members, that you will be able to come to it. I can't tell you how much they appreciate our presence, these volunteers, and it is part of our job that we do, so I hope you will. We have with us this morning our Police and Crime Commissioner, Donna. Welcome. Morning. Anything, Donna, you want to chip in with?
Thank you very much, Chair. I've set my budget and it's been supported by the Police and Crime Panel, which you may be aware of. That is leading to 50 additional police officers. We have already now recruited our 600 police officer, so we will be at 620 odd by the end of March, but we're going with 600 just in case anyone decides to leave. So that is obviously quite a key number, but making sure we're getting to 1,000 police officers or thereabouts as quickly as we can is absolutely my number one priority. I've set £2 million aside into my budget this year to open more front desks. The public clearly have a right to be able to get in and report crime and information, and some of the solutions around that will clearly be by working with yourselves through Hampshire and Isle of Wight Fire and Rescue Service, and you've already referenced Cosham as a great example of where there will be public access and obviously a police presence there as well as fire. I've got £30 million set aside in my budget for a new blue light hub on the Isle of Wight, which I would like to take forward with you and the Fire Authority and your executives in due course, and I'll bring information back to you, when we have moved to the next level.
Thank you, Donna. Thank you. Right, back to the paperwork. Item 7, which is amendment to Members' Allowance Scheme and Special Severance Payments on page 11. And this is presented by Paul, please.
Thank you, Chairman, and good morning, members. The paper you've got in front of you covers 2 relatively minor issues. Firstly, the application of the NJC pay award to the Members' Allowance Scheme, and then secondly, the government's recent guidance on special severance payments. So in respect of the Members' Allowance Scheme, the current scheme was approved by the authority around this time last year and was intended to apply for 4 years, with the allowances in the scheme indexed to the local government pay award over that 4-year period. And the recommendation that was approved last year included wording stating that the applicable pay award for indexing would be that received by the majority of local government staff, but excluding any additional award given to officers on the lowest grades. Now that envisaged that we'd get a percentage pay award that we could then apply to the Members' Allowance Scheme automatically. But as you'll know, the Green Book pay award that was agreed just before Christmas doesn't actually consist of a percentage award this time around. It's a flat rate of £1,925 awarded to all pay points from 1 to 48 on the NJC scale. So that actually represents a variable percentage increase of somewhere between 4 and 10.5%, which gives us a bit of a challenge as to how we apply that to the Members' Allowance Scheme. And if we were simply to add the flat rate of £1,925, it would disproportionately increase allowances by more than 30%. So I don't think that's something members would want to do. So we do need a decision as to how we apply the pay award. And in the services pay structure, senior management roles, so heads of service, start at grade P. And that's, I think, potentially a good grade for comparison with the level at which members operate. And at that grade, the NJC pay award equates to a 3.4% increase. So that is what the paper recommends that you agree to adopt as the right level of indexing for this year. The paper also recommends some minor changes to the scheme to hopefully future-proof it and ensure we can apply future pay awards automatically by specifically linking them to whatever the equivalent percentage for grade P is. So hopefully that will work for future pay awards. So that deals with that part of the paper. The second issue dealt with relates to special severance payments, and as some of you may be aware, the government introduced some guidance towards the end of last year about this. Broadly, government has defined special severance payments as non-contractual, non-statutory ex gratia payments paid to departing employees. So, for example, it might be a payment that's made in addition to other termination payments in order for the individual to agree not to bring any claims. So the guidance is summarised in the paper. Government's view is that such payments should only really be made on an exceptional basis, and that there should be certain levels of governance in place to approve such payments. Now, under our existing constitutional arrangements and the scheme of delegation, the Chief Fire Officer already really has delegated authority to agree severance payments generally and financial settlements under £100,000. So the recommendations really sort of reflect that, but seek to confirm that those delegations would apply in respect of special severance payments, and also sets out how they would apply so that there's appropriate governance in line with the government guidance that enables us to actually approve these payments if we need to, but in an appropriate way. So I think that's probably all I need to say. Happy to take any questions.
Members, any questions to Paul? Cal?
Thank you. Yeah, just in respect of the special severance payments and how those are then recorded or reported, I note that the report talks about payments of more than £20,000, less than £100,000 being approved by the Chief Fire Officer in consultation with the Chairman. Does that then get reported kind of retrospectively at any period back to the authority or the public more generally?
I'm not sure it would be reported back to the authority because it's a decision that's wholly delegated. There is a requirement for all authorities to publish data about exit payments made, and that does include special severance payments. So there will be some reporting of the numbers of special severance payments and the amounts of them as part of our transparency obligations.
Just to be clear, is that something that goes to the governance subcommittee, or does it come to the full authority, or where does it go?
Probably look to Molly there, maybe.
I think because the decision is delegated in its entirety, it doesn't get reported to the Fire Authority or to any of the subcommittees. I believe that we would record those in our sort of final accounts, and they'd be published on the website under, in terms of our duties under transparency if they fall within certain thresholds. And I know that there's been some changes to the legislation recently because we've been updating our policies and procedures and delegations accordingly. So. But I don't think they come back to an authority meeting.
Just to follow up on that, I mean, my suggestion may be, I mean, less than £100,000 is still quite a lot of money. We could be talking about a settlement here of £95,000. If that's something that's happening once a year, okay, I think we could probably all accept there are circumstances in which that's reasonable. But as authority members, we don't know if it's happening a lot more than that. So whether it's perhaps something that could be looked at in terms of a reporting mechanism. I know the data potentially exists in the annual accounts, but whether that could be kind of fed back in a more formal way, just so we can keep an eye on it. Obviously not in terms of individual cases, but in terms of how many there are per year, etc.
Okay. Catherine, would you like to comment?
Yeah, I was just going to highlight it's note 10 in the accounts, and I think in future years it will be expanded to include more detail. So for the previous financial year, there were 4 packages. The total cost was £25,000, so not per package, but in total. But I do think it is probably, I do appreciate the accounts are scrutinised by the Standards and Governance Committee, but they are quite a long and technical document, so it's probably worth us calling this out more specifically to highlight that, because, yeah, I appreciate this is one of over 100 notes. So.
Thank you. Anybody else? No? Okay, if I can then alert you to page 16, where the recommendations, which are that option 1, to apply an uplift of 3.4% to the allowances in the members' allowance scheme, be approved by this full authority. That the authority approves the revised members' allowance scheme at Appendix 1. That the authority notes the statutory guidance in respect of special severance payments and confirms that the Chief Fire Officer has delegated authority to approve special severance payments under £100,000, provided that any special severance payments of £20,000 or more shall be approved in consultation with the Chairman of the authority. And lastly, that any special severance payments to the Chief Fire Officer or any special severance payments of £100,000 or more shall be approved by the authority. In the case of a special severance payment to the Chief Fire Officer, the authority will seek the views of its independent persons before approving such payments. Agreed?
Agreed.
Good, thank you. Moving on to item 8, the budget and precept requirements 23-24, including the medium-term financial plan. This is on page 21 of your papers. Catherine, please.
Good morning, members. So I'm going to cover off the budget and precept report. So I appreciate it's quite a long report and can be very technical, particularly in parts of the appendices. So I was planning today to just cover the main highlights and then take any questions. Can you hear me? Oh, is that better? So take any questions following a brief overview. So I think it's worth saying at the start that there have been significant changes since the position reported to the authority in December, but also actually significant changes within the last couple of weeks. So the report has been fully revised for the impact of the latest firefighter pay award, which was made on the 9th of February. So throughout this paper, the position assumes that the pay award is paid at the level that's been currently offered. So I suppose it's just coming back to the theme of a lot of our budget reports recently of great uncertainty. So actually the uncertainty is potentially now slightly reduced, but obviously there has been quite a late change and quite a significant change to the position. So to start with the monitoring position for this financial year, so as you can see from paragraph 14 onwards, we are now forecasting a really very small underspend of £186,000. And so for the purposes of future financial planning, I've assumed no surplus or deficit as this underspend is now so small. And the reason for this is really some very significant inflationary pressures, which have been offset by the use of contingencies, some underspends on our allocations for capital financing, and some additional income. You'll also see that we do continue to underspend on on-call firefighters, reflecting the current difficulties in recruiting and retaining those staff. In paragraph 21, we talk about a piece of work carried out by a property and facilities team who challenged the rateable values of some of our buildings and have generated some one-off income of £1 million. And it's recommended that this is transferred into the capital and investment risk reserve in order to protect the capital programme in the future. There's more detail about that reserve later. So then to talk about the overall budget position for financial year 23-24. So prior to the announcement of the latest Grey Book Pay Award, we were looking to be in a position of making a contribution to our risk reserves, whereas now we are moving to a position of having to make a small draw from our risk reserves in order to balance the position. But the key changes since the December report are that we have had announcement of funding from in the local government finance settlement, and this was more favourable than we anticipated. So grants were increased by by consumer prices index inflation of 10.1%, and that is higher than we had assumed. It is worth noting that we haven't yet had any notification of any of our Home Office grants, so the current assumption is those are just flat cash with no change at all, but that is still a risk in the position because we haven't yet received any information. The other key change is the ability to increase council tax by up to £5 a year for a Band D property without a referendum. So that's another major change to the position. So this does offer us some opportunities this year, which we haven't necessarily had in previous years. And so paragraph 24 talks about this giving us the opportunity to inflate our reserve contributions that we're making for the purchase of assets. And this was something that we talked about in the December budget report and said we would like to be able to do. The risk is that otherwise the amounts that we're putting into those reserves every year become degraded by the effect of inflation. So when we come to, for example, to refresh our breathing apparatus, we'll then have quite a substantial shortfall, which we'll have to find somehow or other from one-off sources. So this is just a very prudent measure to make sure that we are putting aside sufficient money each year to refresh our existing assets. Then the second opportunity it gives, the settlement gives us, is the ability to continue to maintain some level of risk reserve. So in paragraph 25, I talk about the proposal to change the purpose of one of our reserves slightly. So we have in the past been contributing to a grant equalisation reserve, and the contribution has been made from in the past was made from some pensions related funding that was temporarily not needed. So I'm proposing that we change this to become a budget equalisation reserve. And this is to mitigate both the risk of reduced government funding, but also the risk of inflationary pressures. That is actually currently the biggest risk for us at the moment. So rather than that reserve purely being used for dealing with cuts to funding, it can also be used to deal with unexpected inflationary pressures, such as, for example, the recent Grey Book Pay offer. So this report proposes that we redesignate this reserve and then make a relatively small draw of £264,000 to balance the budget for next year. And that although that does slightly weaken our risk reserves, it also does, because the firefighter pay offer has been made, it does significantly reduce one of our financial risks of a higher than expected firefighter pay award. And then the final opportunity that the settlement offers us is to make an investment in our on-call workforce. And so this isn't necessarily a direct investment in the on-call firefighters, but more about us working to change the organisation so it's set up better for people who are not working in the daytime for us, but actually need to access our services out of hours. So it's about making an investment in our organisation to make it work better for that important part of our workforce. And this is a really great opportunity for us to be able to address some of the issues that are impacting potentially on-call recruitment and retention. So then to move on from paragraph 27 onwards, just to talk about council tax, it's worth noting that the council tax base growth, so the number of houses who are paying council tax, that actually has been lower than we had expected this year, and that's probably an indication of changes to the economy, so that has reduced. But the key point here is that fire authorities have been given the flexibility to increase council tax by up to £5, which would be 6.63% for Hampshire and Isle of Wight Fire and Rescue Authority. In future years, it's anticipated that the referendum limit will come back down to 3%, so it's for this year only the higher rate. As everyone's aware, current cost of living pressures mean that any increase to tax is a challenging decision, but hopefully the graph in paragraph 30 provides some reassurance to the Fire Authority that 61% of households in Hampshire and the Isle of Wight are in bands A to C for council tax purposes, so they would have a rise lower than £5 per annum. It's also likely that people in bands A to C are more likely to receive some other kind of support with council tax. So more than half of the residents of Hampshire and Isle of Wight will have a lower rise than £5 per annum. This increase, this additional council tax flexibility brings us an additional £1.88 million a year, which is absolutely essential for us to manage the budget in the medium term and also to deliver improvements in support to our on-call workforce. So in paragraph 33, there's actually the figures of what the council tax would be for each band. On the papers on your desk, there is a 1 pence rounding difference on, I think it's band B and band F. So it's just for the record, we just want to be clear that it's 1 pence difference. So it feels like a small difference, but I think it is important when people get their bills that they agree with what we've said. So apologies for that change. So then paragraphs 36 to 42 cover increases in business rates and other government grants, including noting the risk that Home Office grants have not yet been confirmed. And then paragraph 46 onwards talks about pressures in the 23-24 budget. And so one of the major sources of pressure for our budget over recent years has been the need for us to build up the funding to repay the borrowing when we make it for the Station Investment Programme. So we're continuing to do that this year to gradually increase our capital financing so that when we do take on the borrowing, we'll be in a position to pay that back, which is obviously a prudent and sensible measure. Because our reserve balances remain relatively high, we're not necessarily anticipating taking on as much borrowing as we have ability to repay next year. So, and our reserve balances are also generating more income in the short term than they would have been because of rising interest rates. So we're proposing to, in the short term, divert some of this underspend into the Capital Investment Risk Reserve, which will allow us to mitigate risks to our capital programme because of either interest rises or inflation, which are certainly still both live issues. So that is covered off in a specific recommendation that £1.5 million is transferred into the Capital and Investment Risk Reserve. Then to talk briefly about efficiency measures. The service continues to deliver efficiencies. We're in the second year of a 2-year cashable efficiency savings programme. There's more detail in a new appendix H to the budget report, and this is partly in response to a request from the Home Office for us to be able to share our efficiency plans with the Home Office so they can be clear about what efficiency measures we're making. As part of our Safety Plan Year 4 objectives, directorates have all been tasked with delivering 3% efficiency savings, and that's in excess of the amount that's been required by the Home Office for us to make, and those will be reinvested within the service to drive improved outcomes against our priorities or to limit the need for future growth. And we will continue to report progress on delivery of those efficiencies to the authority. So then paragraph 54 onwards, we move to talk about the medium-term position. And it's really worth highlighting that when we're making the decision about the council tax level for this year, it's important to consider the impact on the coming financial year, but equally the medium-term position. So this is what this next section of the report attempts to do. I feel like I say this every time, but medium-term financial planning is still very challenging. So we have made some sensible assumptions about inflation guided by latest figures, but it is difficult to forecast inflation even for the next couple of years, let alone for later years of the plan. So I think current forecasts are that inflation will return to within the targets set by the Monetary Policy Committee within the next 12 months, but it's really hard for us to know whether that will happen in reality. And it's also worth highlighting that the plan has been prepared in line with the financial principles adopted by the authority at the December 2021 meeting, and those are included within the reserve strategy, which is Appendix D. So the overall position is that there is a small deficit in 23-24, which grows over the period of the plan. And this is mainly a result of the need to build in resources to repay the borrowing for the station investment programme, and also the fact that inflation is forecast to increase faster than our funding. So that's the main drivers of the growing deficit in future years. Paragraph 61 highlights the importance of the £5 council tax increase to the medium-term position. So, as well as not being able to deliver the benefits that we talked about earlier in the report in terms of support for the on-call workforce and inflating our reserve contributions, we would also be facing a deficit of in excess of £2 million during 2023-24, and then this would fully exhaust our budget equalisation reserve, which would mean that for future years we would need to be looking at closing a much larger budget gap, and we would have to start immediately making plans for addressing that much larger budget gap from 24-25, which would have to include the options for reductions in service. Just to highlight again that in Appendix B, the medium-term financial plan is set out, but it is all based on prudent assumptions rather than really any detail about either government funding plans or actually really any detail about future pay settlements beyond the next financial year. So to move on to and then just paragraph 63 to 75, they just set out some of the key assumptions that have been made in the medium-term financial plan. So I'm happy to take questions on any of those. Paragraphs 76 to 80 cover the capital programme, and so there was some fairly major updates to the capital programme in December, and it's just worth highlighting that the full capital programme is included as Appendix C2, which is a confidential appendix, which, because it contains commercially sensitive information about particularly our building programme. So if we did want to discuss the details of Appendix C2, we would need to move into an exempt session. So it's also worth noting that there has been a slight update to the capital programme, which is an update for forecasts for the vehicle replacement programme. And so that includes the impact of inflation on the vehicle costs, as well as adding a further year to the programme. So the way that the fleet is composed is in line with the priorities set out in our integrated risk management plan, which covers the period up to 2025. So any changes in composition to the fleet identified by the new community risk management plan would be reflected in the programme, but currently the programme is set out to provide sufficient vehicles of a sufficient quality to fulfil the requirements of our plan. So, and I'm very nearly finished, but just to talk a little bit about reserves. So there's a fully updated reserve strategy that's included as Appendix D. And this reserve strategy sets out the purposes for which the reserves are held and forecasts the reserve balances over the period of the medium-term financial plan. It's worth noting that this year we're expecting reserve balances to reduce significantly with, for example, a £10 million reduction on the capital payments reserve. And that is because we have made significant progress on a few of our capital schemes funded from this, including the vehicles programme, but also, for example, the Bishop's Waltham scheme and the live fire training facility. So and this reduction in reserves is expected. The balance was exceptionally high, and so as forecast, the balance is starting to reduce. It's also worth noting that in the reserve strategy, we show that the most significant balances are fully committed to future spend. And then we have a selection of a small number of other balances that are held to mitigate risk. And what I think this strategy has been vindicated by the fact we've been able to respond to a higher than forecast grey book pay award. We've been able to deal with that position by taking a small draw from a risk reserve in the short term, rather than needing to make immediate plans to deal with that by changing services for the start of for an award that in effect was announced in February with an impact straight away. I think, in terms of then the rest of the report covers off some of the technical appendices. Paragraph 86 onwards just talks more about all the risks that are currently within the position and what we are doing within our financial strategy to mitigate those risks. And it's probably just worth also highlighting that we cover off, so we've got the technical appendices, the treasury management and investment strategy, the capital investment strategy, and then the section 25 report, which talks about the robustness of the estimates in the budget and the adequacy of reserves, as well as just a small section on our insurance strategy at the end. So I shall leave it there, but I'm very happy to take any questions.
Catherine, thank you. That was delivered with remarkable clarity. Thank you. Keith.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, I just want to say I think this has been very well prepared. I think it's a really good, detailed report. So my remarks, I don't want to detract from that. First of all, I always think it's important to have as much transparency as you can, in the sense that when something like this is presented to an authority such as ours, it's understandable as what's actually going on. And one of the ways I argued when I was leader of the council is just the use of more graphs. I don't think there's a single graph in this report. And I genuinely feel, particularly when you're looking at things like what priorities you're going to have in the future if the reserves start going down, what you're going to do and what you cannot do, I think it's quite important that we do have some graphs so you can see the trends going on. In other words, what's happening to our reserves, what's happening to our expenditure in different areas. So you begin to get a picture overall, as I believe an authority should have, as to what's happening now. All the information is there, but it's quite difficult to mentally put it in perspective. So that's my first point. My second point is really one to have a go at the Home Office. I can never quite understand why government departments think that we can carry out activities as a result of the decisions they make in a matter of hours or days, whereas it takes them months or if longer to actually make up their minds what they're going to do. And I just think it is unacceptable that at this stage of the budgeting process, we still have the Home Office, which is notorious for being behind many other departments, I have to say, coming up with what are going to be the grants for the following year. So that's just a statement. But I think it's worth recording that we do expect government departments to at least play the game in terms of the timing. Otherwise, it makes all our jobs harder because we've got much less time to sort things out for the coming year. I think it might be, and I know this is a difficult thing to do, to have some idea when we're talking about the costs to council taxpayers of the fire service, to get some idea how the costs in Hampshire compared with other comparable fire services. Not easy to do because of the different ways across the country fire services are actually funded. But nonetheless, as a council taxpayer, I think it's useful to have that information. It's probably there somewhere in the document. I haven't seen it yet because, generally speaking, Hampshire, the people of Hampshire are pretty well off compared with many other authorities, and I'm talking about the districts and the county precepts, compared with many other authorities across the country. But and I would like to be able to say that although there's an increase in band, whatever it is, for the fire service, the overall cost of the fire service in Hampshire compares favourably. I'm pretty certain that's the case, but I don't actually have the knowledge to be able to say that. A minor point in terms of the budget and the grant equalisation reserve. Am I right in saying that is still different to what the county are doing? Are the county still using the budget bridging reserve?
Yes, they are. Yeah.
I just think that just for the sense of clarity, it might be a good idea to just line up what we call it with what the county call it, because the county are providing the backup for, I don't know whether people agree with that, and simply stick to the terminology that perhaps at least some of us round this table understand. I've almost finished, you'll be pleased to hear. Final point I'm going to make is income generation. Clearly, when you have an inflationary situation, you would expect some increase in income generation. Again, that's probably in there somewhere, but I think that's an important element, however small, in relation to the overall position. Thank you, Chair, for your indulgence of letting me talk at length. But I always regard every year, this is probably the most important part of the whole process, because this is what we then have to sell to people out there as to why what's happening is actually going on.
Thank you, Keith. Got that, Catherine?
Yeah, so just to come back to a couple of those points, I was just smiling about the point about graphs, because I think accountants tend to like tables, but I realise that normal people like graphs, so it's a very good challenge that there is one graph in there which is new, but we've only got one graph in there, so yeah, we're definitely, and then yeah, definitely, yeah, I think it's a very good point. In terms of council tax level, so last year we were in the bottom quartile of council tax raising authorities. We're still definitely in the bottom half. I will get an actual position and circulate that to members about exactly where we are, but we're still in the bottom half.
Good, thank you. Members, Tony.
Thank you, Chair. I too would like to thank you for this report. In a former life, I had some familiarity with seven-figure public sector budgets, but this is much more complex with its various reserves and capital and revenue. And you've opened it up to of someone who's financially not trained in a way that I can follow and understand, and I'm very grateful to that. Generally, you've answered all my questions before I've got to the end of the document, which is really good. There was one question I did want to ask, though, in the recent has there been any allowance within this for the recent inspectorate report that's come in? And the particular example I'm thinking of is they seem to suggest we had too many fire engines. And I wonder, in terms of the capital reserves, whether that has an impact on our planning in that way.
So, yeah, and so I think it was we're trying to draw out in the report that what we are doing is we are making sure that the engines we have, which we need, which are identified in our safety plan, are maintained to a good standard and are available. The replacement programme for vehicles is replacing the oldest appliances in our fleet. The risk of not replacing those is, firstly, your assets aren't of the right standard, but equally it becomes very expensive to continue to fix those. And we have seen some increased costs on our fleet maintenance because of the age of some of our fleet. So in terms of whether we've got the right level of vehicles, I think that's more of a Stu question, if that's all right.
Thanks for the question. I think frontline capability always comes to the fire authority, so that would be a decision reserved for yourselves as members. So the next time that would come with any proposed change, whether it would be to increase or decrease, would be as a result of the CRMP, which I think is going to be discussed a bit later on the agenda. So that would come forward in a matter of months, years to here. What I'm concentrating on is making sure that all of those appliances are as available as we can be, and making sure that the service that we're given is as effective as it can be. I think the ups and downs that the inspectorate picked up, there's not individual engines that aren't available ever. It's just periods of time where we struggle, as the report says, with daytime cover for our on-call colleagues. So hopefully that answers the question, that it will come back to here, any plan changes.
Okay, Roger.
Thank you. Catherine, can I just ask you, the £1.25 million additional firefighters' pay inflation, does that include the pension contribution and the national insurance contribution? It does. Can you provide a figure which is purely the pay? Not including the NI increase and the pension increase. Right, and because I think it's interesting is that on pay, it's nationally negotiated, it's done by a proper body, and I think government should accept the extra costs and not pass it on to us. Because we're sat here having to increase the council tax, and we're between a rock and a hard place, because the public out there haven't got the money to pay the council tax these days when you include all the others, and we want the money as well. So because of how inflation is affecting us and the needs. So to me, pay is something which government should be paying, because what they're doing is they're shifting the taxation from national level to local level on a basis, it's not based on the ability to pay, it's just where you live. And that is an unfair system. So to me, is that I think within our recommendations, I would like to see a recommendation that we make make a recommendation to the government that they pay for pay increases, because that is the only fair way about it, I believe. I would also like to ask on the fleet, which was mentioned a minute ago, we used to have leased vehicles. Do we have any left? Or are they all our own now?
Yeah, they're all our own now. We don't have a lease scheme
Don't have a
currently.
lease one. No, good. So there was one other bit I thought I had. Yeah, the efficiency, and I think I've said this before, it worries me that efficiency is on operations directorate, the bulk of it. And when we look at operations, it's going out and fighting a fire, going to a road traffic accident or whatever. And so I have great concerns there. I would like to see some more savings coming out of back office. But so I just have concerns. I'm going to support the budget, but I have, as I mentioned a moment ago, concerns about the council tax increase. I know when you look at it, £5 a year is not a lot, and I know when you look at it that the individual amounts per month, it comes down to very small amounts of figures. But when you put it in with all the other council tax charges which people will have, it's a cumulative figure, which is really unacceptable nowadays. Thank you.
Thank you, Roger. Noted. Derek.
Thank you, Chair. If I may just follow on from what Roger's just been talking about, the council tax. Last year we had a situation which didn't meet favourably with all the authority members, where the £5 had actually led to a 2.5, at one time, to a 2.5 million surplus on our budget, which would be difficult to explain to council taxpayers. In the end, of course, because of the current pay actions and everything else, it's all been balanced out. So it was probably a good, on hindsight, it was a good and essential move. I'd just like to query, though, one thing. Roger just raised the situation of the government taking on responsibility for the pay increase that their National Joint Council has agreed to. We're in a situation, Roger, where 80% of our costs are salary or salary related with pensions and things. I don't think you'll find it possible that a government would take that on, and we have to manage our own affairs. Third point I've got is this £5. It does appear, if you go back to the graph, the one graph, or the tower block that you showed, Catherine, page 27, it does appear we're not going to be getting £5 per household anyway. Is that correct? You've got A to C households at 61%, and some of those will not be achieving the £5. And I'm surprised to see in rural Hampshire anyway, you've got hardly any houses in the Band G and Band H contributing. Have you got a comment on that?
So the way that we always talk about the increase to Band D, and that's because the way that council tax works is the districts look at their number of dwellings in each band, and then they work out the equivalent number in Band D. So actually, so we talk about, I think it's at the council tax base is 717,000 Band D households, which doesn't actually mean 717,000 households. There's actually a lot more households than that, and it varies for each district. So it's sort of a weighted average that's used. So that's why we always talk about Band D. So the fact that the majority of the houses aren't in Band D is already taken account of in that weighting. And yeah, the Band H, I mean, it isn't 0%, but it is, for the purposes of this grant, such a small number that they don't really feature. So you can, if you're interested, see breakdowns of the different bands across each district to see where those properties tend to fall. But it's a weighted average.
Probably it's the wrong area to ask, but Donna, is that the case with the police then as well?
It is exactly the same, and actually when you look at which Catherine can send you, the what your precept is for Band D and then A, B and C, what it also doesn't take into consideration is that for the poorest people, the most worse off in society, bands A, B and C, a lot of those people will also, on top of that, be receiving a council tax precept grant, which could be 75% up to 90%, depending on the council's financial position. So actually, if it turns out that, for example, a Band A looks like they're going to be paying, is it 60 odd pence or whatever it will be here, actually they might only have to pay 15 pence extra a month because of the grants they're receiving. It's done exactly the same way for my budget. Yeah.
Karen.
I'm quite lucky that I'm on the PCC panel as well, but Donna spoke about the 30 million set aside for the Isle of Wight for one estate. I think that's the terminology we're using. So I wondered, have we put something aside as well to facilitate that?
So there is an earmarked amount on the confidential appendix for some Isle of Wight investment.
We are very much benefiting from you taking the risk and financial strain of Cosham. So you're doing one and we're leading on the other, if that makes sense, without going into any numbers.
Thank you very much. I did not know that, so that's great. Thank you very much. And I want to say, Catherine, that's a great report. And this is my third of 4 budgets I've got to do this year. Thank you very much.
Cal.
Thank you, Chair. I've got questions across 2 topics. So to start the first part of that, I know earlier on we talked about the urban search and rescue team and the vital work they do across Hampshire, the UK and obviously internationally as well. I know that as part of a previous discussion around finances in this authority, there was some uncertainty around the future funding of that team and I think government grants, so it may come under what we've talked about in terms of Home Office. I just wondered if there was an update on that, and if it is still uncertain, do we have a plan in place to kind of secure the future of that service for an alternative funding arrangement?
So we have got the update from not all of the national assets. So we've got a couple of decisions that have been made. USAR is one of those. We're one of the teams which will continue. So we'll continue to get that funding moving forward.
Great, thank you very much. And just moving on then to the second part of what I wanted to ask about in terms of efficiencies, picking up on some points that have already been raised around workforce efficiencies. I just wondered whether there's any more kind of detail you can give around what that is going to look like in practice. I know there was reference to investment in kind of infrastructure for on-call workforce, but is there are there any other ways that we're looking to kind of save money from the workforce side? And just a specific question around crewing model changes, what they look like in practice and how they deliver cash savings.
So the There's a big, it's a programme of change, effectively. This has been discussed with and led from my team, discussed with some of the middle managers, and we're trying to basically drive a position where we co-design all of our options around this sort of stuff. So it's plans in early place, if you like, for the completion this year around some of those. The efficiencies, what probably will help with Councillor Price's question as well, is that I want to give you the reassurance that this isn't about taking firefighters away from their duties on a daily basis. This is about providing firefighters or shifts that make much more use of the firefighters across the head count. So it's not about having less firefighters available to be able to fight fires on a daily basis. That will be the same, because that's frontline cover, and that would be reserved for decision of the Fire Authority. This is about how many we need on a fire station to be able to provide a crew. So it's working much more efficiently. With the crewing systems, again, to give you some reassurance, I met with the Fire Brigade Union last week and the other rep bodies to discuss how we move towards that. So again, I want to do that, with their consent, if you like, and with their help. So that will kind of move forward. At the moment, we have a number of different crewing models across the county. So if I take right in the west of the county, Andover crew very differently to Cosham, for example, both whole-time stations. The plan is that we will try and adopt the best methods from each of those to suggest those to the other stations to make them much more efficient. So Andover is very efficient because they adopted a new crewing system. Cosham perhaps less so, and we would look to use some of the same principles to try and work that forward. So it maintains the same number of firefighters on duty today at this moment in time, but actually the number of firefighters that you need to provide those 4 people on a truck could be less.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Catherine, for the report. Great reading it over the weekend. I have some questions and I do have some comments. I'm going to take to table 1 on page 23, just to refresh my memory. I noticed there was an overspend on premises and transport. I understand the transport, I suspect that's fuel costs. But can you explain how we had an £800,000 increase in premises?
It's utilities. So, yeah, gas and electric.
Wow. All right, thank you for that. The investment in the on-call workforce is a figure of £800,000. I don't see anywhere, and I don't recall a bit ago, so explain how you're going to spend that money, what it's going to be spent on, how you're going to measure success, and what the perceived outcomes will be. Can somebody inform me on that, please?
So the intention is not to increase the headcount and pay for additional firefighters, it's to support. So it takes currently quite a long time to recruit firefighters. So during the recruitment process, some of those firefighters, prospective firefighters, have other, find other forms of work or move on. So part of it is around recruitment to try and shorten that time frame to recruit them better. Firefighters are only available for short periods of time during the week. So again, training them is very difficult. We're set up for whole-time training, bringing people to the centre. So it'll be about looking at other ways to train them. It's about access to facilities. So making IT facilities work better for them, giving them more support around the IT so that they can utilise that remotely. So all of that will be pulled together into effectively a board, and that's the intention, is to bring all of these ideas into one place, to set some objectives at the start, to measure the evaluation objectives, and then measure them through at the delivery. So all of that hopefully is being thought of. It's just not the detail you don't have within there, and perhaps at some stage, perhaps an APAG or something like that, we can bring that back and just talk that through.
Yeah, I'm sure the APAC would love that in the future, so I won't be there. Just with, how do you define success? If you do all those measures, how will success look?
I had a conversation with the rep bodies about this just last week. So through some hard measures in terms of speed of response, availability of appliances, contractual hours that people put in, but also some soft measures, so how people feel, how they are engaged in terms of their ability to train, to provide hours. So hopefully across the two, that will give a fair reflection of success.
And I have one more question, if I may. I bang on about this, but this fire and rescue indemnity company, Frick, on page 40, you talk about the premiums going up between 2018 and 2019 to 2022-23, which is about a 31% increase in payments. Is any of those increases related directly to the inclusion of the Isle of Wight into the fire and rescue service in Hampshire?
I can. Yeah, there will be an element of that, which will be part of that cover, because our cover would have extended over onto the island as well. So there will be an element of that. It won't all be that. The rest of it will be, normal increases every year. But there will be an element certainly as part of the new combined authority.
Okay, thank you. It is a really interesting report, slight concerning as well, particularly when you look at the MTFS and the challenges for the future. And I take the point that Councillor Price and Councillor Mellor have raised in respect to the £5 increase. But I would also like to add the point that there are lots and lots of our residents that are asset rich and cash poor. So, you're in a Band E, Band F property, you may not be getting the necessary support you need. But now, in terms of additional outgoings, precepts from the police, precept for the fire service, increase in Hampshire and local authorities, because quite often our residents don't understand that the council tax serves 5 beasts, not just the one. So I do accept it, and I understand the compounding effects and therefore the benefits you see moving forward. It is a challenge, and I think some of the points made in respect to the responsibility of central government, in particular the departments of state, where they seem to be devolving responsibility out to the regions, but they're not giving them the financial power in order to exercise that responsibility in a fair and ethical manner. But thank you very much.
Thanks. Members, any further comments or questions to Catherine? Okay, if I can alert you to the recommendations on page 42, of which...
That I did say about trying to get the government to pay more of this pay. I don't know whether anybody else agrees with me, but I think putting something in a recommendation on that basis is that would try and help, because we're lucky we can afford it within our budget. Looking at the fire service as a whole, there are a number of services that are going to have great difficulty, and the emails that I've seen around is that there's going to be closures, redundancies and closures of fire stations in other parts of the country. And it's because of the pay and not getting the right money from central government. And it is a problem. If we don't put pressure on central government to give us more in the way of grant aid, for whatever purpose, nobody else is going to put pressure on them. Our MPs don't seem to want to do it. So I think that we need to put in there a recommendation that we write to them, say that there should be more funding to the fire service.
I think we will, but just at the moment that is slightly beyond our pay scale. But we can, and we will.
But should it be in our recommendation?
I don't think so. No. Moving to the recommendations then on page 42, and there are a lot. The authority is recommended to approve the 2023 monitoring position as set out in paragraphs 14 to 21, including a £1 million contribution to the Capital and Investment Risk Reserve of 22-23. Next, the revenue budget as set out in Appendix A. Next, the draw of 0.38 million for the Transformation Reserve to support the delivery of the Year 4 Safety Plan priorities as set out in paragraph 49. Next, the contribution of 1.5 million from one-off underspends to the Capital and Investment Risk Reserve as set out in paragraph 47. Next, the medium-term financial plan as set out in Appendix B. Next, the capital programme and funding as set out in Appendix C1 and exempt Appendix C2. Next, the reserve strategy as set out in Appendix D. The Treasury Management Strategy as set out in Appendix E, including the annual investment strategy of 23-24 and the remainder of 22-23. Delegated authority to the Chief Finance Officer to manage the Fire and Rescue Authority's investments and borrowing according to the Treasury Management Strategy statements as appropriate. The Capital and Investment Strategy as set out in Appendix F for 23-24 and the remainder of 22-23. The Section 25 report as set out in Appendix G, which should be taken into account by the authority in agreeing the budget and council tax. The council tax requirement for the authority for the year beginning the 1st of April 23 of £57,425,898. That the authority's council tax be increased by £5 for a Band D property for the year beginning 1st of April 23 and for the properties of each band to be increased by 6.63% as set out in paragraph 18 of this report. Namely, Band A, £53.62, Band B, £62.56, isn't it? Band C, £71.49, Band D, £80.843, Band E, £98.30, Band F, £116.18, Band G, £134.05, Band H, £160.86. And lastly, that the preset set out in paragraph 33 of this report, totalling £57,455,898, are issued on the billing authorities in Hampshire, requiring the payment in such instalments and on such dates set by them and previously notified to the authority in proportion to the tax base of each billing authority's area as determined by them. Agreed? Please don't say no. Agreed. Good. Thank you. Catherine?
I think a schedule that isn't no one's really agreeing to. I think it's more, I think we're notionally agreeing, but I think it will set out when they pay us the money. So yeah, I don't think they make us an offer.
Right, people, come back. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. We move to item 9 on page 111, which is the Health, Safety and Wellbeing Statement 10/23/24. I would invite Steve Polly to present.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, members, and hopefully this will be less controversial than last. So page 111 of your pack is the paper, and I draw your attention to page 115. Statement 324, which is submitted for your approval. The Health Safety at Work Act requires organisations to have a statement, and this is with you to sign off today. The statement itself should be an annual document stating the organisation's general policy on health, safety and wellbeing at work, and is signed by the most senior person in the organisation. And so it's proposed, like previous years, to be in your name, Chair, and also jointly signed by the Chief Fire Officer. The statement annual Appendix A is consistent with last year's, except for some minor drafting amendments. We believe our current statement reflects our position and commitment to health and safety within the organisation, and so do not believe changes are needed. Our overall intent is to put health, safety and wellbeing at the heart of everything we do, and pledge to give employees our full support in doing so. Importantly, this includes visible leadership to put in place a positive culture and uphold the highest safety standards, while also empowering employees to raise concerns should they arise. Just to look at the statement itself with a few in particular highlights. So, number 1 is to strive to put the best possible health and safety standards in place. We do that. The safety team work closely across the service. We have an onus on preventing injuries. We provide all necessary training and equipment, so we have a training matrix covering all roles across the organisation, and therefore making clear what's training and what qualifications each individual should have. We also give a commitment to reporting and investigating all incidents when they occur, and as I said before, we empower our staff to carry out their work in a competent and diligent manner. I want to stress that we have a strong health and safety arrangements in place. We have an active team working across the service. Therefore, the statement and the intentions are realistic, and they also can be met. We also have a culture of cooperation in our management of health and safety, and working closely both proactively and reactively with our trade union colleagues. Hopefully the statement itself is fairly self-explanatory, so I'll pause there for questions or comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. Members, any questions? Roger.
The only question I've got is, as I understand, I mean, I come from Porchester. Co-Row do a lot of work out of Porchester, and I know that when someone's been out on a co-row, and unfortunately there's been a death through where they've been, and they can be traumatised by that, they can get help from the service straight away when they get back to the station and whatever. Should that be in here of how to contact, what they have to do to contact somebody when something's happened and they get back to the station, when they're a lone worker? Because in those co-row is going to be a lone worker. It's not like an appliance going out where you've got the crew, you can discuss it with the crew.
Thank you. I've already assumed Mo will come in, but this is routine for control. So as any return to base following an incident, control would ensure the welfare of the individual concerned. Should there be issues of significance, fatality or a serious injury, they will check on the crew's concern. Stu, Molly, around sort of trim and other welfare practitioners?
So Steve's absolutely right. So the control will monitor all of the calls, and there's certain elements that trigger the trim procedure. So they'll trigger that, and then that will follow through. So the co-row will be proactively contacted and then go through that process.
But is the co-row called out by the NHS rather than our own control room?
Yeah.
So therefore, how is our control room involved in knowing what is being said through NHS?
So for speed, the mobilisation's done by the NHS, by SCAS. They will mobilise the person immediately, and then in the intervening period, we'll update control. So if I look on the control log now, there will be co-row incidents on there which have been updated from the ambulance control room. But to get the speed of response that we want, the NHS directly mobilise them and then copy that after.
So if somebody is in need, they're reliant upon our control room contacting them, not the person involved going to somebody. Because I'm thinking of a co-row person, they're on their own, they come back in, they've dealt with the situation, and they've got through that okay. But then they suddenly get back and they realise, and they start, I don't know, going to being traumatised at that point. They need to make contact with somebody to get the help that they need, which we have there to provide for them, and we've got it there. And I'm just wondering whether there should be something in this to say, well, you need to do this, and not be reliant upon our control room contacting them. I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm just...
I think if I can just sort of help with, this is our the statement of intent about how we manage people's welfare. There are procedures that go alongside this. So there's procedures for those members of staff that are working on their own, or as you suggest, a co-row. So they would know how to initiate that themselves. But proactively, we also initiate the critical incident diffusion, which is the TRIM element. So they'll get contacted anyway, but that doesn't preclude them from being able to do that themselves. So they can do that if they follow the procedures. This is more the overarching policy. The detail on the procedures and how that works in practice is I can give you that reassurance that that's within the framework.
Karen.
Thank you for explaining that, Stu. I just wanted more a statement, really, that the wonderful 9 that went out to Turkey and did their work there, make sure that they're being looked after as well.
Any more members? Zoe?
Yeah, I think leading on from the discussion, I think the detail in the report explains it. The statement itself talks about empowerment, but the intentions afterwards are quite most probably operational and quite health and safety led. I welcome the bringing in the well-being aspects, but I'm not too sure at this moment in time the intentions necessarily encompass those statements. It's quite driven by legislation, quite rightly, and duty of care, but doesn't necessarily, those list of intentions underneath, doesn't necessarily fully encompass the opening statement when we talk about health, safety and well-being. So thinking about things of disclosing mental health, disclosing neurodiversity and disabilities, I just maybe think there might be a bit of work on one of the intention statements to encompass that, so it might be clearer, as we heard from Councillor Price there.
Thank you. Any more members? Steve?
Nothing from me, thank you.
Okay, if I can direct you to page 114 for the recommendation that the proposed statement of intent for 23-24 be approved by the Hampshire and Isle of Wight Fire and Rescue Authority, full authority. Approved? Good, thank you. Moving on then to item 10, the annual statement of equality, which is on page 117, and this is presented by Molly Rowland.
Good afternoon, members. So this is our annual report, which meets our obligations. Is it too far away? So there we go. Meets our obligations under the Equality Act 2010 to publish equality information on an annual basis and update the authority and our progress against our equality objectives. So the equality information can be found at Appendix A of the report, but I specifically wanted to draw your attention to how we compare nationally, as I believe this best displays the progress we've made as an organisation. So our increased proportion of females in whole-time and on-call role means that we're now performing higher than many other fire services, both when you consider our operational workforce and our entire workforce. And we believe this positive progress is attributable to our positive action, which has been highly successful in increasing our number of female trainees during our trainee courses. Our employment of non-white British personnel has also increased to 5%, and this is also mirrored in our recruitment figures. Whilst this is in line with the national average, it's still below the Hampshire and Isle of Wight community census data. So we're still a couple of percentage points behind representing the communities that we serve. So we know that there's more we need to do there in terms of understanding the barriers those communities face in joining our organisation. So whilst much of our progress is positive, and we've certainly seen increase in our figures, as you can see in Appendix A, we know that it takes some time to become representative of the communities that we serve, and therefore it's important that we remain committed over the longer term to our positive action and to developing an inclusive culture where everybody feels welcome and respected. And that's why our equality objectives and the actions that we take to deliver those are so important. And I've summarised those for you in Appendix C of the report. But again, I wanted to draw out particularly the fantastic work of our network groups who have been champions at promoting diversity and inclusivity within our organisation. Real highlights that we've seen over the last 12 months have been the personal supportive passport, which is there to support members of our staff who have learning needs that they might want to share confidentially, and it's been recognised as really good practice by the Inspectorate. We've also, post-COVID, been able to attend far more community events than we have done over recent years, and they've been a brilliant opportunity to meet members of the community, share our messages around our workforce, about the sort of organisation that we are and the values that we have within our organisation. And it's also really assisted us in delivering positive action that has been face-to-face rather than perhaps virtual, which is what we've had to do during the COVID pandemic. We also have our growing peer-to-peer recognition scheme, which is where members of staff can give thanks to each other for demonstrating and living the values and behaviours that we've committed to as an organisation. And that scheme sees more and more people be nominated every month and really demonstrates how embedded those values and behaviours are becoming within our organisation. Another focus for us this year has been promoting positive mental health, and hopefully this will go some way to reassure Roger in terms of the questions that he asked before. So we do recognise that members of staff see traumatic things, and that we need to ensure they know how to access the support that is available to them. And that's one of the reasons why I've circulated today on your desks our mental health toolkit. We know that many of our staff don't use the intranet as much as some of people like myself do, and therefore we wanted to ensure that they could still access information about the support services available to them. So these little toolkits will be distributed amongst staff and available on fire stations, in particular on call, where we know that staff don't log on to the intranet to look at the wellbeing services available to them, but will be able to kind of at hand see all of the support available to them. So hopefully that goes some way to reassure you, Roger, but please have a look at the toolkit, and if you've got any questions, more than happy to answer them. So in closing, I just wanted to draw your attention to what our focus will be for the next 12 months. Following the release of the London Fire Brigade's cultural report back at the end of 2022, we've undertaken quite a thorough review of that report and considered all of the recommendations within it and of its findings. So we've undertaken a comprehensive gap analysis, and whilst we are confident that we have some of the systems and processes in place already, such as our confidential reporting line say so, that weren't available to staff in London, we know that there's more we can do. And in particular, we want to assure ourselves that our staff are not in a position where they feel unable to tell us about incidences of bullying or harassment that might be happening within the workforce. So we will be particularly focusing on issues of bullying, harassment and discrimination, both through a kind of training focus, but also through developing and working with an external expert who will help us facilitate some surveys and workshop sessions where we can really seek to better understand the challenges that our workforce might be experiencing. So that's going to be a particular focus for us for the next 12 months, really with the intention that we can eliminate any of those behaviours should they exist within our organisation, and that we continue to ensure that all of our colleagues are treated with dignity and respect. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Molly. Oh, Lord, Roger.
Molly, in the page 126, we've got 162 preferred not to say what ethnicity they are. That represents 11% of our total workforce. That is quite a surprising figure to me. Is that usual? You get such a high percentage not saying in organisations? That's the first point. And the second point is, I remember a number of years ago that there's the Black Firefighters, I think it's Black Firefighters organisation, black and might be black and something else. I can't. They have
AFSA, the Asian Fire Service.
Asian, that's the one.
Yeah.
What other organisations do we have within the service here, which you communicate with as a group or represent their group?
So we have our Fire Reach network group. Which? Fire Reach.
Yeah. I know it's in this other document. You've got 4 listed, but I'm wondering whether there are others as well to find out what the total number of groups that we have.
So there are 4 network groups that are kind of supported by our EDI team. We also have a group who focus particularly on our values and behaviours, and they've done lots of work around how we seek to embed them. So they really champion the peer-to-peer scheme, and also nobody has Shantha got her water bottle. Has anybody got their water? Oh yeah, that's they designed the water bottles.
Right.
So they do that. Obviously, we work quite closely with our trade unions, and they also have some subgroups within them that's particularly focus on women's issues. So we work with those, and yes, we do still work with AFSA, and we work with an external organisation called Inclusive Employers, and they deliver some training and for our staff. So I think the last session that we did about that was about being anti-racist and how actually being a bystander to racism is not okay. So there's sort of various groups that we or organisations that we partner with.
Tony.
I didn't answer the prefer not to say. Yeah, no. So it's definitely higher than we would like it to be in terms of people saying prefer not to say. So it's something that we need to work to reduce and give people the confidence to feel able to share their information. We do know that certain groups feel reluctant to do that, and that's why in particular you will see on Appendix A we haven't been able to include sexual orientation data as part of this set either, and that's because that information is not currently available in that way. So there's certainly a journey that we're on in improving our data, but it's working with our staff to feel confident to share that information and know that we intend to use it to better the organisation and improve ourselves rather than for any sort of ulterior reason. So it's about gaining confidence with our staff, and that's the journey we're on.
Thank you, Chair. I read your report with interest. Thank you for it. I'd like to particularly commend the work you've done on neurodiversity. I think that's excellent and rightly picked up by the Inspectorate. I congratulate you on your speedy response to the London Fire Brigade report, and that's now translated into some action. I think that's entirely appropriate, and I think that looks promising going forward. And I look forward to hearing more about that and hopefully working with you in some degree with the People Champion hat on. So thank you.
Thank you.
Keith.
Can I make my normal plea for the odd graph? Yeah, it's just to show trends, because clearly, although we're below the national average, clearly we're climbing quite rapidly. The other quick point I'd make is I have a little difficulty lining up the comments made in paragraph 12 with the figures in the appendix. I just want to confirm that you're saying that we have at the moment 5% of staff are non-white British. Is that right?
Yes.
And just I'm certain you're right, but just line that up to the figures in the appendix.
I might be looking at a different version to you, but it's the second page.
The breakdown in the
table.
ethnicity. That's the one I'm looking at, which is on, well, it doesn't have a page, no, page 126. I think you're right, but it's quite confusing.
It's the one, sorry, the 5% is in the table above that, the smaller table, which breaks it down into various staffing. Sorry, I just realised my microphone isn't on. It's the table above that, which breaks it down into various staffing groups that gets you to the 5%. The breakdown by ethnicity is much, much smaller because it breaks it down by individual ethnicity types available within our reporting system. I don't know if that helps.
Well, yes and no. The answer to my, it really makes the point, is if you want, you know, I would have thought that the 5% related to that graph, which shows everything else, you break down by ethnicity. Sorry? Well, no, I was going to say I think that would help it. Because, you know, if you look at the numbers, they're so small with some of them, you're beginning to get the point. If you put them in a table like that, they become almost meaningless. That's why I do believe there needs to be what I would call a better way of presenting this, so that we as an authority have an opportunity of actually saying the right things. Like, it's quite difficult. 5% fine, but what if you've got a graph like that? It needs to, if you've got a table like that, it needs to be related to it, that's all.
I'm certainly, do you want me to come? So, yeah, sorry. So if you, this doesn't necessarily help with your answer, but in terms of within the table, the ethnicity profile, the white British is 84%, and our prefer not to say is 11%. So that comes to 95%. Now, we don't know for the prefer not to say, but I've made an assumption based on the rest of our equality data that most of those people would continue to be white British in that group. But that could be incorrect.
Yeah, that's what I thought you'd probably say, and I don't disagree with that. It's just, what I'm really saying is that when you get down to that level, this is the sort of thing that happens, you know, when you've got a group that's not preferring to say, and you've got white Eastern Europeans and white Irish, white other, you know, what does all that mean? And that's why I think it just gets too detailed, and actually you don't achieve decent result anyway. But it's just the point.
I certainly take on board that the display of the data could be improved, and we'll work on that.
Yep. Thank you, Keith. Gary.
Thank you, Chair. I have to declare an interest. I'm also the Vice Chairman of the Employment in Hampshire County Council Committee. So seeing a workforce report like this brings back the memories of the HCC workforce report, where we had a very similar discussion in terms of items of rise and take. My first question relates to, let's do this one. Appendix A, you only have 2 genders, male and female. Yet we know at the graduation ceremony 2 ago, there was somebody who declared themselves to be non-binary. Is that not captured in here?
It's not captured in here currently. It's not a requirement that we report on gender other than male and female. It's certainly something that we continue to champion, and that we will seek to improve our data capturing locally in support of those staff, but also continue to push the agenda through the National Fire Chiefs Council, that actually we should be reporting far more broadly in terms of gender profile.
I'm not necessarily sure I agree with the last part of that statement, but I understand your answer. If I can take you to Appendix C, I think it's C, yeah, it's C. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, just on that particular point, Councillor Hughes, it's something that is actually quite a frustration of us when we're reporting to the Home Office on our data returns and to the inspector, and it's something we have engaged directly with because we can only provide nationally what they ask of us. So absolutely, in the spirit of our sector becoming far more diverse and showing that, it's really important to show there's more genders beyond male and female, and obviously to report on that. So it's something we're actively engaged with nationally on.
And from a HCC perspective, when we looked at graphs in relation to gender and LGBTQ, etc., when I asked a question about transsexual, the numbers were so low they couldn't appear on a graph because you wouldn't have seen anything on that pie chart. You wouldn't have seen anything because the number was so low. But it does beg the point, and I don't particularly have an issue. I have a comment. The comment is we spend so much time talking about LGBTQ equality, and I have no issue with that. But in terms of the actual numbers, they are almost none or infinitesimal. So. Bearing on that, can you explain what you mean in page 133 of the second bullet, development of a trans inclusion policy and range of associated webinars to support pronoun visibility? Is that within the fire service or the fire service projecting out to the wider public?
So we developed an internal policy or procedure around supporting individuals who are transitioning and ensuring that managers and staff know where they can go to support if they are working with a member of staff who is on that journey. And we have our Fire Out network group have been championing the use of putting your gender pronouns in email addresses and things. So it's an internal campaign.
Thank you. Again, if I may just go over the page, you talk about Objective 3, respectful. We have launched an internal campaign called Celebrating You, which provides funding. Can I ask what the source of that funding is and say how much it costs so far?
So you will recall in previous years, we used to have Celebrating Success, a kind of annual award ceremony, and we used to run that prior to COVID, and then it had a break during COVID, and during that time we spoke to our staff about how they would most like to be appreciated and thanked, and actually the feedback was that the one-off event didn't feel that it truly reflected our appreciation for them, or that they felt it was as inclusive as they would like it to be, and they really wish to be able to do something locally within their teams to thank each other and to celebrate their successes during the year. So it's cost us no more than the cost of running that as a one-off event per year, but instead we've given that money an allocation per head, and I think it's £18 per person per head, that teams can claim and then apply for the funding, and then they're given the funding in order to go off and do a team activity. So I know people have done alpaca walking or miniature golf, or different events, but it's a real opportunity for us to express our thanks to them.
So a team building event as well?
Yes.
And finally, what disturbed me the most was we delivered an anti-racism webinar to explore how our service can become anti-racist. Are you therefore, are you saying that the service is racist?
No, I certainly hope that it's not a racist organisation. And yeah, so maybe that's not worded most helpfully. I'm happy to take that feedback. But that was one of the seminars that I spoke about earlier on. So that was delivered for us by an external organisation, and it really was pushing the agenda of how to ensure that actually just not being racist is no longer good enough, and that we must go further to be anti-racist, and really pushing that it's not okay to be a bystander to racism of any form, and trying to instill in us the courage to speak up.
Molly, thanks for that clarity. That's really helpful. And no further, Chair. Yes.
Thank you. And just really that last discussion really illustrates wonderfully the journey our organisation's on in terms of its culture. So If you recall from some of the press articles with the Nazir Afzal review of London Fire Brigade, obviously there were some terrible incidents that happened, but a lot of that culture is around people not being able to speak up, feeling they can't. And what we're trying to get to is giving people the space, the tools that they feel empowered that they can do that. And that, for example, that anti-racism is about being actively anti-racist rather than not being racist. So very much pushing us on that cultural journey so people are able to speak out.
If I may, if it said something like how our service can challenge racism rather than become anti-racist, made it explained a little bit better.
Karen, please.
I think the better way to say it, and it goes back to safer streets and stuff, is being a positive bystander. So calling it out, actually, and working for a better society.
Zoe.
Thank you, Chair. I think there's some real positive aspects of this. Some we haven't mentioned. Menopause Cafe, and specifically focus on domestic abuse and violence for victims, and obviously their managers that posted that. I think the main point for me is the agenda item 9 and this particular one are interlinked, and I think it goes back to my point. We talk about empowerment and well-being, but actually it's about that psychological safety to disclose, to talk about it, to have a safe environment. Even going back to pronouns is to respect others, but also it's quite a cultural shift to use them and they, and actually have a safe environment when people make mistakes, that you can do that in a learning environment. And I think they are both intrinsically linked. I think the agenda item 9 and 10, and maybe that intent for well-being needs to be added in regarding that health and safety and well-being statement, just to incorporate that. But I think there's much to be celebrated, and it is a journey, and there's some excellent stuff in here that we've mentioned, so thank you.
Okay, Molly, anything to close?
Only whilst I can, I would just like to give huge thanks to the network groups for their support for all this activity.
Okay, thank you. Members, if I can draw your attention to...
Tony had a question.
Tony, did you have a question?
Just very quickly, Chair, if I may, a couple of points on the ethnic breakdown. Actually, if you take out all known white people, our percentage of non-white is actually tiny, isn't it? And I'm pleased that there is plans afoot to try and tackle that, but it's only about 2%, and that's woefully unreflective of our populations, particularly in our cities. So there is a lot of work to do, and I know you're on the game, but I do want to say there is still a lot of work to do. And the other, as an observation that I'd welcome your comment on, is around the number of gay people that we've recorded as part of our service is very, very small. But that can equally reflect that people don't feel comfortable in declaring that, and whether we have a lot of work to do there potentially. And I am pleased that we are a modern service that is having a focus on anti-racist practice, and it is a proactive thing that we need to be doing, and we have to always be ahead of that game. Thank you.
Right, members, if I can draw your attention to page 141 for the recommendation, which is that the Year 4 Safety Plan improvements be approved by this full authority. Approved? Good, thank you.
Oh, no, sorry, it's the wrong page.
Sorry, we'll rewind. Page 123. That would be a better one. Page 123. Which is that the annual statement of equality be approved by Hampshire and Isle of Wight Fire and Rescue Authority. You agree with that one? Excellent. Right, thank you. Moving on then to item 11. the Authority Safety Plan Year 4 refresh on page 137, which is Alex Quick to present, please.
Thank you, Chair. Members will be aware that the Service's 2020 to 25 safety plan was approved in April 2020, and then subsequently each year we've sought your approval for in-year improvements as part of that safety plan. This paper outlines our proposed activities for year 4, so that's 23-24, and provides further detail on those in Appendix A. 23-24 will be a significant year for us because it will be the start of our next phase of planning as we move forward into 2025 to 2030 and commence the CRMP, which there's a subsequent update on later in the agenda. And it'll also see us starting to respond to some of the findings in the inspectorate report where we deem it necessary. The improvements, as I say, are outlined in Appendix A on pages 143 and 144 of the pack. And you should be familiar with quite a few of them because they've been subject to previous scrutiny at previous meetings. That includes the CRMP, the ongoing work to align to national operational guidance, station investment programme, retrospective design principles, and the carbon improvements work. In addition to that, there is reference to our planned improvement to support on-call staff, which was discussed earlier when Stu provided further detail. There's also reference to our plans to deliver 3% efficiencies across the service. We're also going to review all non-transactional services provided under the shared service to identify whether they're providing value for money and effective service delivery. We are also going to undertake a range of assurance activity as well, some of which was alluded to in Molly's paper. One is the LFB culture review, the London Fire Brigade culture review, also the inspectorate report, and then the next phase of Grenfell Phase 2 inquiry, and also the Manchester Arena inquiry follow-up, which published late last year. And then finally, there is an activity there in terms of improving the service's health and safety function, which we can provide further detail on. There's also a specific focus on that with our response to contaminants as well, which is being delivered as a programme activity across the service to ensure that's managed effectively. But I'm happy to take any further questions on any of those activities or points within the paper.
Thank you, Alex. Members, Gary.
Thank you, Chair. Alex, I read this, and the safety plan must be the hierarchical plan for this service because everything's in there. Under safety, carbon reduction is safety. Premises building is safety. Is this the one plan fits everything plan for the? Because it seems everything's listed in it. It just seems strange.
So there's a range of activity outlined here, but underneath the safety plan, there's also directorate plans. So obviously we have a number of directorates, corporate services, people and organisational development, and others. We have specific planned activity that support the safety plan. So the safety plan is the overarching plan with those activities outlined. And then underneath that, we've got individual directorate plans which have additional activity which support the safety plan.
So for clarity, sorry, so for clarity, the safety plan is the authority's safety plan, which is why it comes here. And that it's the top plan because that is derived from the process of the integrated or now community risk management planning. So that's the overarching plan.
Okay, thank you.
Anybody else? Karen.
Oh, hello. I just want to thank Matt and his team for the work they're doing on the carbon improvement with my own local authority, the Isle of Wight, that encompasses the Isle of Wight part of that plan. So thank you very much.
Roger, please.
Within the safety plan, should there not be recognition of the NFCC? Because they're coming forward very much with ideas and policies which each fire authority should look at and do. That has only been in existence probably 2 to 3 years at the most. And I guess, we talk about Grenfell Phase 2, Manchester, and all of these sorts of instances.
but the NFCC is also bringing forward policies to the fire service, and surely that should also be in here somewhere. It's in, I think, some of the words earlier on, but not actually in the document.
If I can come back on that. So we could probably be a little bit more explicit perhaps in the specific activities, but to assure you that everything we do is fully aligned with the NFC's approach. So for example, fire standards has been, although it's the Fire Standards Board is an independent board, that's been fully designed and consulted through and by the sector and by the NFCC. Likewise, with the third improvement activity to continue to align to the sector's current approved codes of practice, the strategic and tactical national operational guidance, again, that's what's been developed at a national level. So perhaps there is something about making that a little wording of NFCC really more explicit, but everything we are doing is in line with those national standards, fire standards, etc.
Thank you. Anybody else? Alex, any closing remarks?
Nothing further from me, thank you.
Okay. If now we can go to page 141 for the recommendation, which is that the Year 4 Safety Plan improvements be approved by this full authority. Approved? Agreed. Thank you. Item 12, the Community Risk Management Planning, 25 to 23, on page 145. I would ask Steve Polly to introduce us.
Thank you, Chair. Hello again. So this report builds nicely on from Alex's last conversation around our safety plan. So this introduces the work to produce your next safety plan covering 25 to 30. And the report outlines the work to date and seeks your approval to our proposal. This is the start of the conversation with yourselves, so please be rest assured you will hear lots of this over the coming 2 years, up to April 2025 when the next safety plan is agreed. As members may be aware, every fire authority is required by the Fire and Rescue National Framework for England to assess all foreseeable fire and rescue related risks within their area and implement plans to mitigate them. This is known as a Community Risk Management Plan, which we refer to locally as the Safety Plan. You may be aware of the term Integrated Risk Management Plan, IRMP. That term has now been superseded by the Community Risk Management Plan, so that's some terminology for you. Our current safety plan runs to 2025. We have high ambitions for our next plan, so this work has already begun to produce your next plan. An executive group agreed last summer to the approach, and work began in earnest in September 2022. Our work is proposed to align closer to the National Fire Standard, which I'll say a bit more about shortly. We've also consulted with local fire services, or in fact national fire services, to learn their best practice, and also sought expert advice from bodies such as the Conservation Institute, who have given us some really robust ideas and thoughts around how we should consult and engage with our communities, as well as academia, who will look to engage during the course of the process. As the paper outlines, we intend to carry out an innovative two-stage process to produce your next safety plan. Stage 1 is about building our understanding of risk. So this is done through both qualitative and quantitative data. And then we'll have kind of a Chinese wall to stage 2, where we'll come up with the mitigations which we'll design with our partners and also across those with the service, before then consulting with our local communities. What is important is we will consult widely throughout the whole document or the whole programme, including with our staff and our staff network groups, also with our representative bodies, local partners and also communities. We'll also ensure you are cited throughout the whole process, and you'll given opportunities to shape our thinking as we work through it. We have a number of principles which we are working towards over the course of the next 2 years. The first is to meet, if not exceed, the National Fire Standard in this area. We also want to develop a holistic view of our external influences, as well as the local context, to get a full understanding of our risk picture. We will base all of our understanding on solid evidence. There'll be a separation between understanding risk and identifying mitigations, and then we'll embed communication, consultation and engagement throughout the whole process from start to finish. Can I ask you to look at page 153, which is the colourful appendix. This is taken from the National Fire Standard and illustrates the kind of journey we're going on. So from left to right, we'll first of all define the scope of the work we're doing and how this fits into the wider service. as the conversation which Councillor Hughes and Alex had just beforehand, the safety plan is all-encompassing. We'll make sure this is how this impacts across the whole service and the work we do. Then moving right, we'll then identify the hazards we face, including who our high-risk groups are, and then identify which hazards pose as the highest risk. So look at their likelihood and consequence through some common methodology, which is the kind of the stage 1 approach. Then stage 2 is about identifying proportionate control measures. As part of the decision-making process, we'll use the best minds across the sector to help us do this, and then we'll embed evaluation across what we do. So both how does the process work, and then more importantly, the control measures we've embedded, are they having the impact that we're looking for them to achieve? The diagram at the very top and very bottom has some areas embedded throughout the whole process, all 5 steps, and this is clearly part of our own plan. So data and business intelligence data is absolutely crucial in this to build up well and to come up with our control measures. Equality impact also absolutely vital, as well as stakeholder and public engagement, and that is what we're looking to achieve. These are the core strands which will be embedded throughout our whole work. This work will ensure our next safety plan is developed in line with national best practice to identify our priorities against a clear understanding of our community risk. And as I said before, this is your plan, so make sure you are involved at all parts of the process, as well as coming to you to clear the relevant parts when the time is right. I will pause there for any questions. Thank you, Chair.
Members? Gary?
Steve, I'm curious, will the authority as a whole be engaged in this process, or one of the working groups?
So we'll obviously bring regular updates to the authority, clearly use your advisory panel as well, and also happy to consult with you as well. So what we're looking to do is engage with all our communities, also engage with our politicians and also other stakeholders. So there'll be lots of opportunities throughout the whole process to both engage with you on a personal level, also in your own professional capacity as well. And then also plans and mitigations will come to the authority for sign off as well. So next 2 years, we'll certainly map out our engagement with you and make
Keith. Very quickly, how exactly do we engage with the wider community?
So this is what we are currently discussing with the Conservation Institute to shape our engagement. So the 2 phases. Phase 1 is around discussion. So we're not looking at mitigations now. We're about talking to our community about what affects them, what do they need from us.
Who are we talking to when you say our community?
Sure. So we're doing a variety of methods. So one is focus groups. So working with so across every area of all of our geographic areas, both hard to reach groups. So working with charity sectors, third-party organisations, other known groups, whether they be part of our own kind of mailing list or interested parties, engage with them, focus groups, hear from them what they want from us, as well as then web surveys, online events, a whole raft of opportunities to gather that information. So phase 1's around discussion, what do you want from us? Stage 2's then around, these are the mitigations, what do you think, how does that affect you, are you content? So very much looking at discussion for stage 1, consultation for stage 2, and then working with bodies to engage with the people we need to be in front of.
Does that include all the parish councils?
It does indeed, yeah.
And the final point, what about the other rescue services? Are you engaged with them? For instance, the air sea rescue team, the air ambulance, and obviously the police and
yes, we are.
the NHS.
Absolutely. So stage 1's about building the risk profile. Vital part of that is understanding what our partners face as well. So we are looking at both our local partners, Blue Light, charity sectors and others, as well as local fire and rescue services, so how are our neighbours set up, what is their risks. We need to look 10k over each of our borders, and therefore how are our neighbouring services set up as well, and how do we work with them. So just to reassure you, throughout the whole process, we are looking across all of our emergency response partners and others.
Thanks.
Steve, anything else?
No, thank you.
Okay, members, page 151 for the recommendation, which is that our proposed approach to produce our next safety plan is approved by this full authority.
Agreed.
Thank you. Item 13, which is property matters on page 155, and I would ask Matt Robertson to introduce, please.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, members. So this is a report you will all be familiar with the format. It reports retrospectively on decisions made by officers under the scheme of authorisation, the scheme of delegation within the Constitution. So for your information, the definition of that is at 2A. So anything which falls out within those parameters. This time round, there are 4 transactions that have been done, which are outlined in paragraph 5. Happy to take any questions you may have.
Any questions, members? Gary?
Just one related, if I may, Matt. You talk about 5D, which is the land station PCMI site purchase from Portsmouth City Council. What is the intention with the current site of the Cosham Fire Station once PCMI site comes online?
So that is currently offered to the City Council on a land swap exchange as part of that purchase, but only once we're ready to vacate the site. So basically be released to the City Council to use.
So just for clarity, are we saying therefore that we got that land from the PCMI site for 1.6 million plus the Cosham site?
Yes, so the 1.6 million plus there is a capital receipt to come back on top of that. So we've purchased this new site for 1.6 million. When we move on to that site, the current site will be disposed of to the City Council at a figure already agreed, and then that will be a capital receipt in effect. So it will net off that 1.6. But it
be less than 1.6 million.
Correct.
Thank you very much.
When we get to that point, yeah. It may be in an appendix, so just check if it's in appendix 2 or not, or 1, yeah, whether it's in the confidential one or not. We'll just double check it. Yeah, well, give us a second just to check where it is. Yeah.
From that. Any more members? Okay. Page 158. The recommendation is that the item set out in this report be noted by the full authority. Thank you. Item 14. Minutes of Standards and Governance Committee on the 28th of November 2022, page 159. Any comments, Chairman, of that committee?
Happy to be taken as read.
Happy? Agreed. Happy, agreed? Okay. Right, now